President Obama calls for war against the violent militant group calling itself the Islamic State. Will the U.S. Congress give the authorization? A triple killing of Muslim students at an American university leaves a community stunned. Was it a hate crime? Keeping the lights on in Africa. In our special series, we examine power issues in Kenya as experts weigh in on the way forward for Africa. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. Now, the global threat posed by Islamic State is increasing. And in response, the administration of U.S. President Barack Obama has submitted a draft resolution to Congress requesting formal war authorization against the violent militant group.
Speaking at the White House and flanked by Vice President Joe Biden, Secretary of State John Kerry, and outgoing Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel, the president said he wanted to be very clear about what the resolution does and does not do.
This resolution reflects our core objective to destroy ISIL. It supports the comprehensive strategy that we've been pursuing with our allies and our partners. A systemic and sustained campaign of airstrikes against ISIL in Iraq and Syria, support and training for local forces on the ground, including the moderate Syrian opposition.
The president explained that the international coalition against Islamic State is on the offensive. Islamic State is on the defensive and is going to lose. Mr. Obama said the resolution his administration has submitted to Congress does not call for the deployment of U.S. ground combat forces to Iraq or Syria.
It is not the authorization of another ground war, like Afghanistan or Iraq. The 2,600 American troops in Iraq today largely serve on bases. And yes, they face the risks that come with service in any dangerous environment, but they do not have a combat mission. They are focused on training Iraqi forces, including Kurdish forces.
Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said Tuesday there is no more serious matter that ever comes before the Congress than an authorization for the use of military force.
Looking forward to seeing the language that the president feels like he needs, and that will certainly be one of the dominant discussions in the next few weeks.
Mr. Obama sent his request to Congress a day after his administration confirmed the death of Kayla Mueller, a 26-year-old aid worker who was the last known American hostage held by the group. Carolyn Turner, VOA News.
When Islamic State militants seized parts of northern Iraq 6 months ago, one of the areas hardest hit was that of the Yazidis, an ethnic religious minority living around Sinjar. The militants reportedly killed thousands of men and took the women and children captive. A few of the young women eventually escaped, and they recounted their harrowing ordeal to VOA's Scott Bob in Badra, 40 kilometers north of Mosul.
Badra camp in northern Iraq, home to 15,000 displaced Yazidis. Thousands of others are being held captive by Islamic State militants known here as Daesh. 18-year-old Soham Mohammed escaped after 6 months' captivity. She agreed to talk if her face and real name were not revealed. She says IS invaded her village in August and took away all the men.
They separated 7 of us girls by force from our mothers and took us to a house. The food was not good. After a month, 2 Daesh guys came, and they chose some of us and took us to a house in Mosul.
Soham endured repeated rapes and beatings until a month ago when she managed to escape. She says she ran all night until she found a family to take her in. They eventually contacted her uncle, who rescued her. IS fighters killed about 1,700 people in the village of Kocho. More than 100 young women were separated and taken to a house in Raqqa, northern Syria, says 22-year-old Sarah Hussein. The militants showed up that night.
Each fighter brought a girl for himself. They came to buy and sell us and convert us to Islam. They raped us and didn't give us food. No one was spared. If one resisted, they would hit all of us, breaking our hands and our heads. We couldn't do anything. Sometimes 3 of them would violate one girl.
يعني كشكاجي هوا البرعة ديمي خدا بس تشتك جينا تسسير راد بناياكي.
Worse, she says, is what is happening to the younger children.
بشتي ما خو خلاص كري
We
نهم
escaped,
هاتنا نفت
but we are not
فارقي
happy
ونشلي
because
أنهم
our
هاتن
families
أهلي
are
ما
not
همي وكمال
All our
دستيوان
close
دابو
families are with Daesh.
وكبري مدمري
They
بني يعني
brainwashed
داكا
the
ما
small
بابي ما
kids and
برايد
gave
ما
them
خوشكل ما
injections.
جن
All
برايد
these
ما
kids in the
برازيل مالي
future
أنهم
will
همون
do the same
دستيوان
things
دابو
to us.
إجبار أفزار ويد كتشك.
Hussein is angry at the response of the international community, which she says has been too little and too late.
All the major countries are attacking them. America, Saudi Arabia, Australia, France. But they don't care about us. They just care about Iraqi oil. If they want to help us, they would free our kidnapped people.
Hussein escaped in November. She says she wants to testify to the International Court of Justice about what was done to her and her people. Scott Bob, VOA News, Badra, northern Iraq.
We're staying in the Middle East. Houthi rebels in Yemen's capital have reportedly seized U.S. embassy vehicles after American diplomats left the country following the embassy's closure. State Department spokeswoman Jen Psaki said Wednesday the U.S. is looking into this.
Clearly, it is unacceptable, and we would reiterate that in order to return to Sana'a, respect for property, respect for our facilities, and is an essential component of that. So we certainly are requesting they be returned.
Psaki declined to discuss security for the embassy, but said the U.S. expects to return to the embassy in the same condition.
There were reports also, I think, that some had entered the compound. We don't have anything to confirm those reports at this time.
The United States, Britain, and France announced the closure of their embassies in Yemen because of deteriorating security conditions in the country. The U.S. State Department said late Tuesday its embassy staff had been moved out of the Yemen capital Sana'a, while Britain announced early Wednesday that its staff had been withdrawn. France will close its embassy on Friday. Yemen has been mired in political turmoil for months. Last month, Houthi Shia rebels took over the residence of President Abdi Rabbu Mansur Hadi, prompting him and his cabinet to resign. The rebels finalized their takeover of the country last Friday, announcing they have dissolved parliament and are establishing a new presidential council to run Yemen affairs. Anti-Houthi protests were reported Wednesday in Sana'a and Taiz. Well, for the latest, I'm joined on the phone from Sana'a by Zaid Al-Alia, a journalist and analyst of Yemen affairs. Zaid, we're hearing that Houthi fighters have actually overrun a military base today in the southern part of Yemen, and the UN is saying there could be a civil war in this country. What can you tell us?
Look, based on what is happening, it's very much like I blame the political parties and the different political forces and social forces in Yemen that until now, even from the beginning of the National Dialogue Conference, they could not reach an agreement. They could not understand that Yemen cannot rule by one side. Al-Houthi did a big mistake when he announced the constitutional declaration. But I do not blame the Houthis only, because throughout the previous days, there has been a lot of discussions under the supervision of bin Umar among all parties, but they could not reach an agreement. Everything has to go through. They agreed on something, and then some international powers or regional powers will interfere and impose some procedures or some steps on the situation, and it gets more complicated.
Now, from your assessment, where do things stand right now? Is there a possible resolution to this problem? Compromise?
There is always a possible solution for what is happening in Yemen. I told people should know that the situation in Yemen is very complicated because it's not only one force that is quarreling or conflicting. Houthis, Islah, Socialist, Nasrid, Qaeda, Southern movements, all these should come together. Otherwise, Yemen will get scattered. We will not have only one country. The people in Marib will announce their own state. People in Ta'az and Al-Janad will announce their own state. People in the south will announce their own state, and Yemen will become scattered.
That will be chaos. Zaid, who is in charge today? Who is the government in Sana'a?
There is no cabinet. The revolutionary committees of the Houthis are running everything, but not in all over Yemen. Houthis are controlling 2 regions. The Azar region that includes Sana'a, Damar, Sa'da, and Amran. They control part of Hajjah, Hudaydah, and part of Eb. The rest, they are running on their own. Marib is going by its own self. Aden, they're not receiving any directions from the central base like in Sana'a. They are running their own. And today something very important happened, that Al-Qaeda group captured a big military base in Shabwa, and they took all the arms in that area, which Al-Qaeda will flourish because of the not agreement among all parties.
Zaid, thank you very much, and I want to thank you also for some fabulous photos that you sent to us that you took from the demonstrations in Sana'a. Well, Zaid is a journalist and analyst based in Sana'a, the capital of Yemen. Now, here in the United States, hundreds of people gathered for a candlelight vigil at the University of North Carolina Wednesday to remember 3 Muslim university students shot to death over a parking dispute. But their families say it was a hate crime and are calling for an investigation. Here's VOA's Paul Sisko.
At the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill Wednesday night, people comforting one another, promising to honor the memory of the victims.
I really wanted everyone to realize that, we have to unite against these things, and it's really important that we all come together and realize who they were and who they are, and just how many lives they touched, so we can all carry on that legacy regardless of whether we're here, whether we knew them or not.
It was stated very clearly here that there's sort of a feeling of we need to take their memory and move forward. We can't grieve or express hatred towards those who committed the acts, but it's important to take their memory, and the best way to sort of preserve what they meant to the world and what they meant to us is through positive acts in the community and around the world, really.
Earlier Wednesday, 46-year-old Craig Stephen Hicks made his first court appearance. The 3 victims were found dead Tuesday in an apartment near the University of North Carolina Chapel Hill campus. Police tell the Associated Press the shooting was motivated by a long-standing dispute over parking. A U.S. Muslim leader says the killings have characteristics of a hate crime.
If you look at his Facebook, it says it all. It is actually, I can just tell you a quote that a Muslim has to have their big mouth shut, or else. That is meaning that he was meditating or planning or having some hate. We don't like to say it's hate crime, but it looks like it.
Hicks had posted anti-religious statements on social media. However, authorities have not determined a motive for the killings. Hicks is being held without bond. His next court appearance is scheduled for March 4th.
Well, that was VOA's Paul Sisko reporting. We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered during the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. And check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Coming up, Kenya's Rift Valley is being touted as the answer to the country's energy wars, but there is a problem. Stay with us to find out what it is.
Hockey's my passion, but it's not always easy standing out on the ice. I credit my parents with giving me the discipline and confidence to follow my dream. I became the first black official for the National Hockey League. To me, Black History Month celebrates sacrifices like my father made to give our multicultural family a better life. My name is Jay Shares, and I'm an official for the National Hockey League.
Welcome back. President Barack Obama has announced nearly all of the remaining 1,300 American troops currently fighting the Ebola outbreak in West Africa will soon return home. The White House cites U.S. success combating the epidemic with a decline in the number of new cases in affected countries. VOA correspondent Arupande has our report.
At the height of the epidemic, some 2,800 U.S. military personnel were deployed to West Africa to help contain the deadly virus that has so far claimed more than 9,000 lives in Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. Now, nearly 5 months after Mr. Obama committed the American troops to set up treatment centers and other infrastructure to stem the outbreak, the president announced Wednesday that all but 100 will return home by April 30th.
Not to declare mission accomplished, but to mark a transition. Thanks to the hard work of our nearly 3,000 troops who deployed to West Africa. Logistics have been set up, Ebola treatment units have been built, over 1,500 African health workers have been trained.
Flanked by healthcare workers, members of the U.S. military, and Ebola survivors, President Obama thanked those on the front lines of the fight and emphasized that while the United States is winding down its military response, it is expanding its civilian response. In the 10 months since the first American healthcare workers were deployed to West Africa, the president said the U.S. has helped treat Ebola patients, trace their contacts, promote safe burials, and galvanize the international response. He said the number of new cases in the region has gone from nearly 1,000 a week in October to roughly 150 per week today.
Our focus now is getting to zero, because as long as there's even one case of Ebola that's active out there, risks still exist. Every case is an ember that, if not contained, can light a new fire.
It's a message reinforced this week by United Nations Special Envoy on Ebola while referring to a recent uptick of new cases in Guinea.
The outbreak still presents a grave threat, and we really hope that there will be no complacency among anybody involved in the response.
Nabarro says that in addition to getting the number of cases and transmissions to zero, affected countries will also have to focus on rebuilding their economies and their health systems. Aru Pandey, VOA News, the White House.
Well, this week on Africa 54, we're bringing you a special series called Power Africa that is examining the power issues affecting the continent. Today, we have two excellent reports for you. We begin in Kenya's Rift Valley, where a rich source of geothermal power is being touted as the answer to the country's energy problems. But most of the drilling sites are in natural parks that provide important tourism income. Lenny Rovaga has more from Nairobi.
This is the Olkaria geothermal facility in Naivasha, in Kenya's second smallest national park, Hell's Gate. Olkaria produces 280 megawatts of geothermal power, enough to serve the needs of 500,000 homes. Kenya Electricity Generating Company, KenGen, has embarked on the expansion of Kenya's largest geothermal project as the country moves to initiate green energy projects. The additional phases will add 350 megawatts to the national grid, a move generally welcomed by most Kenyans. Some locals are upset about the facility's location. For the past 6 years, 30-year-old John Ndirangu has been a guide in Naivasha, taking tourists by boat on the lake in this area. He used to earn around $800 a month, but says the drilling to harness the geothermal power has cut tourism and had other negative consequences.
Firstly, because the animal migration has been affected. The placement of the equipment, the drilling equipment does that. Secondly, human health is affected due to emissions of hydrogen sulfide, sulfur dioxide. And thirdly, the disturbance from the noise from the drilling wells.
Hell's Gate National Park is home to a variety of wildlife, including more than 100 species of birds, some on the endangered list. Conservationist Sarah Higgins, who is also an honorary warden of the Kenya Wildlife Service, runs the Naivasha Owl Center, which rescues and rehabilitates birds of prey. Most of the birds here were injured at the geothermal plant built in their natural habitat. For Higgins, the future of conservation in Kenya is at stake as energy companies roll out their new green power plants.
From what I've seen, all the future sites that they are planning are all in conservation areas, within parks, within conservation areas, and also, unfortunately, also within migratory routes. This will cause huge damage to not only our wildlife, but also our tourism industry.
KenGen plans at least 2 more geothermal units in Olkaria by June 2016. They are a small part of Kenya's blueprint to meet the country's energy needs by 2030, which are estimated at 17,000 megawatts. Lenny Ruvaga for VOA News, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, energy experts say there is an urgent need to accelerate the pace of public and private investment when it comes to lighting Africa. They say governments alone cannot do it and need to involve the private sector to bridge power capacity gaps. VOA's Maria Diallo has more.
Energy experts say sub-Saharan Africa has enormous untapped resources of oil, gas, geothermal, coal, solar, hydro and wind power. Yet the World Bank says 1 out of 3 Africans lives without electricity. Stephen Njiru is the director of Kenya's Geothermal Development Company and an energy advisor to the country's president. He says governments cannot change that alone.
There's been initiatives, policy, statutes, there's been regulatory mechanisms which have been put in place, but there's a huge gap. And there is need for private sector involvement. There's need to build the capacity.
At a recent Washington gathering on Powering Africa, Njiru says it's time to fast-track private sector participation.
The opportunities and their challenges, and we'd like to sit down together and see whether we can overcome this, because we do believe that there is a huge market out there. We believe there's a lot to be done by the private sector.
Kenya was one of the first 5 countries to kick off President Barack Obama's Power Africa partnership to increase power capacity and access.
Access to electricity is fundamental to opportunity in this age.
Power Africa has leveraged more than $20 billion from the private sector for new electricity projects. Andrew Hertzkowitz is the coordinator for the Power and Trade Africa initiatives.
Solar Reserve, a U.S. company based in Santa Monica, California, just won an award in South Africa to build a 100-megawatt concentrated solar project. We've got another big solar project with Gigawatt Global, another U.S. company, that's going to be commissioned next week in Rwanda as well, and that's 8.5 megawatts. It'll provide power to thousands of people as well.
Tanzanian ambassador to the United States, Liberata Mulamula, says while her embassy works hard to mobilize the private sector, governments should be cautious.
You know, all these business people, they always want to come with projects. And you know, most of our governments, of course, we have limited capacity, but we need financing. But financing for very credible projects.
Mulamula says there is no way Africa can develop without power. But while industry experts say the African energy market is ripe for private participation, investors warn they face obstacles including high costs, lengthy negotiations, and potentially high risks. In Washington, Mariama Diallo, VOA News.
Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, an English bulldog becomes an internet sensation for the second time. We'll be right back.
If you've just joined us, I'm Mariama Diallo, and here is a quick recap of today's headlines. In Niger, the government declares a state of emergency in the Difa region, repeatedly attacked by Boko Haram. The South Sudanese government declares that the food crisis reaches a critical level. 2.5 million people are at risk as fighting between rebels and government forces continues. And an Egyptian court orders the release of 2 Al Jazeera journalists on bail at the start of their retrial for aiding the banned Muslim Brotherhood. Finally, in South Africa, 24 of the world's best kite boarders compete for Red Bull's Extreme King of the Air competition in Cape Town. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Well, Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. It's the biggest network news story of 2015 so far. NBC announced that it has suspended Brian Williams as nightly news anchor and managing editor for 6 months without pay for misleading the public about his experience covering the Iraqi war. Williams apologized last week for saying that he was in a helicopter that was hit by a rocket-propelled grenade while covering the Iraq war in 2003. Now, instead, he was in a group of helicopters and another was hit, and some veterans involved in the mission called him out on it. William will lose about $5 million in salary during his suspension, and the investigation into his statement continues. Well, next up, the last few years have witnessed an explosion in the popularity of yoga in the U.S. Now, new figures show that this trend is rising not only in adults, but also in children as young as 4 years old. A CDC survey shows that the percentage of American adults who say they practice yoga has jumped, and more kids are bending. Researchers say in 2012, about 21 million adults practiced yoga, which is nearly double the number of people practicing in 2002. Yoga may be rising in popularity because pretty much everyone can do it on some level, but be sure to check with your doctor before dropping to a downward dog. Well, and finally, an English bulldog that became an internet sensation for his skateboarding skills has taken up another spot. Wearing a life jacket on a beach in Lima, Peru, Beef Buf is the dog, as the dog is known, has now taken to surfing, demonstrating that water sports are not just for humans. While he can't stand and ride the waves on his own, the dog still enjoys himself, according to his owner. Beef has developed a fan base with thousands of visits to his YouTube and Facebook pages for his skateboarding. And that is what is trending today. Now, that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com for more news. Tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight at 1800 UTC, and in the mornings to Daybreak Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching. From all of us here in Washington, have a good night.
Welcome to the Voice of America's Newswords. Guess which word is common in stories about American government?
Capitol Hill.
Appearing on Capitol Hill, the State Department Special Representative for Afghanistan, James Dobbins, downplayed the likelihood of a complete U.S. military disengagement.
When Americans say Capitol Hill, they usually mean the Congress, where national laws are made. The U.S. Senate and House of Representatives work in the Capitol building, which sits on a hill here in Washington.
Now, when you hear the phrase Capitol Hill, you'll know what these news words mean. For more news words, visit our website at learningenglish.voanews.com.